Sharon Osbourne was there from Ozzy's side, a burning force that can't be shaken. The rock and roll chaos. Their love the story was the stuff of tales. Intense and impossible still, behind the cameras, the tours that sold out, and the TV show's smiles. A deeper truth was hidden, one Sharon hid from everyone, until in a shocking turn of events that has shocked both friends and critics. Sharon, the last thing that breaks her silence, the levels of myth to show what's real, the raw truth about her marriage to the Dark Prince. This isn't just a tell-all. It's time to face the candor, being open, and having the right kind of bravery. Sharon's truth can only be known by survivors. Shocked more than anyone could have thought about, but when exactly did their paths first cross? Through a chance meeting that changed the course of rock history for good. The story of Sharon and Ozzy Osbourne began in the jumbled electrics behind the music business is a place where Sharon, revolt and chaos often run into each other. Rachel Arden was only 18 years old when she first met the man who would become a shaped so much of her life, as she worked for her dad at the time, the infamously cruel music mogul Don Arden, who was in charge of some of the biggest rock bands. One of them was already famous Black Seventh Day. John led the group, a man from Birmingham named Michael Ozzy Osbourne, singer, whose eerie voice and his erratic actions made him both. Ozzy's appearance is both attractive and annoying. It was just as mysterious and dark as Sabbath's music. It was clear that he was fighting with their own fears. But something about him interested Sharon. Even in their early, the conversations were short and polite. By 1979, Ozzy had gone down a very bad path and was finally fired for drug abuse from Black Sabbath, kicked out of the very band he helped make famous. Many he thought it was the end of his career. But Sharon saw something that other people didn't. Or wouldn't. She stepped in as a boss, but as a strong believer in the raw ability and crazy genius of Ozzy. In spite of what her father wanted, she started taking care of his solo business, and against even better chances when she started to fall. And Ozzy was still in love with him at the time. He was married to Thelma Riley first, and having trouble with the guilt and confusion and the risk that came with a broken friendship. But there was a Sharon and Ozzy have an explosive spark between them, unquestionable and set to burn through. Guitarist Randy Rhoads, one of Ozzy's best workers, once said, "I think they'll get married someday." But his guess was less of a not so much a prediction as an observation. July 4, 1982, Freedom Day in the United States, where they got married in AA's celebration on the beach in Maui, Hawaii. He picked the date to make sure he wouldn't forget it. It was their anniversary, but he did see the irony, that much I'm sure, who had lived for a long time locked up by drugs and chaos, putting forward his own idea of freedom by tying himself for all time to Sharon. They built a new house together. Empire. Ozzy's first solo album did really well with many records, such as Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Crazy Person, driven by Sharon's management persistence and Ozzy's raw genius. But their private lives were just as interesting. Busy between running trips, and after getting through issues, they welcomed 3 Amy into their world in 1983. It was Kelly in 1984 and Jack in 1985. Their house was a crazy mix of rock and roll chaos and motherly resolve, by no means quiet and rarely reliable, but always based on a secret bond. But becoming a mother wasn't easy. For Sharon, she went through 3 miscarriages, and each one was scary. To remember how fragile life is and carry around the weight of her past. Demonstrate that her cervix was less strong because she was forced to have an abortion at age 17. A traumatic event she rarely talked about, but which hung over her early going through as a mommy despite the harm to her body and mind. Sharon stayed strong and refused to let pain get to them. Describe her journey. And yet the best their partnership wouldn't be put to the test by the fame in the music business or the responsibilities of having kids. It would happen later, and more slowly than all at once, as storms that would shake the very basis of the world knew about their wedding. The money and the crazy behavior, but behind closed doors, they were getting together the public and private demons. A lot of Ozzy Osbourne's public persona has long been used to mean disorder, indulgence, and theater. He was the prince to everyone else. Of darkness, a figure bigger than life, whom lived on the edge of being crazy, and but behind the lights of the stage and crazy behavior lay a much more troubling world that is shaped by addiction, cutting yourself off, and having deep emotions trouble. The first big sign that the monsters were getting worse and worse. Brought in 1982 during what was meant to be an everyday stop in San Antonio, Texas, in a strange and now famous event. Ozzy, wearing one who was very drunk from a picture shoot of Sharon's clothes earlier that day, walked around drunk near the Alamo that stood in front of an old marker for Texas heroes who have died. He went to the bathroom completely unaware in terms of history and culture how important the place was. The act was carried out with quick anger that led to his arrest for being drunk in public and being sent away from the city that would last almost 10 years. But that event was so shocking only scratched the surface of the destruction taking place behind closed doors. Entrance on the same day as the alcoholic cloud got thicker and turned into an angry fit. Ozzy slammed into the people who were close to him in a fit of rage and chaos. He suddenly fired his whole band's key members who had stuck by him through good times and bad. Most sadly, he attacked her physically. Guitar player Randy Rhoads and bassist Rudy Sarzo on a rage he would later describe say they don't remember to the what it might have looked like to the outside world. One more rock star meltdown, a wild title for a newspaper story called. But to Sharon, it was the start of something much bigger. Scary. She had become both of his boss and caretaker, having a hard time to keep his job while managing the changes that came with his addiction. Over and over, she would have to please clean up the public and not public that Ozzy left behind in 1984. Something else happened that made just how far Ozzy had dropped. This time took place in Memphis, Tennessee, where he turned himself in again for public being drunk. The facts were sad and comfortable, staggering, slurring, not making sense, barely recognized as the famous lead singer who controlled areas with ease. Magnetism. Each arrest, each burst, a moment of sudden rage turned into another threat coming from his very mind. These weren't just single incidents or scary stories for rock and roll history. They were the deep, rotting signs of a man falling apart under the weight of his fame. And yet for addiction and deep pain, all the trouble he already caused, things were going to get worse. What happened next would not only that of Ozzy, but almost destroy the someone who stayed by his side after all those years. Sharon Osbourne would finally say something on how bad their marriage really was, letting out such raw and surprising truths that they could not say anything. There was violence behind closed doors. When love turned deadly, the problem between the couple wasn't just sad. They were body. We used to scare the shy out of. We were together. Ozzy would later say, in a one-of-a-kind chance for candor to show the vicious loops of abuse that Sharon was never one to. When the truth is told, it can't be changed. Being honest about being a battered woman, that the statement was shocking, but not as just as shocking as what came next. Ozzy hit Sharon so hard one time that he knocked her out her front teeth. But she wasn't passive in their war of wounds. In a rage, Sharon threw a big bottle at someone else. a shot of scotch right at his forehead, episodes that happened one at a time. Signs of a very bad relationship were pushed to its limits by drug abuse and uncontrolled fame. Then, there was the moment that would change everything between them, a night so scary that it almost ended in tragedy. In August 1989, after coming back from the Moscow Music Peace Festival, Ozzy was taken over by a dangerous mix of drugs and alcohol, not in touch with reality, and falling into a dark, hazy coma. He did the unacceptable. Ozzy tried to choke Sharon, the person who stood by him after decades of drug abuse and adultery. She was right now fighting for her life at the hands of the man she had loved and taken care of for a long time. That there were calls to the cops, and Ozzy was arrested, charged with trying to kill someone for many pairs. That would have been the last one's irreparable break. But wait, there's more. People who were close to her were shocked. Sharon didn't press charges. Instead, it was Ozzy who she sent to a rehab center, the place where he spent 6 months taking on his problems and the monsters that almost killed him both, even though it hurt. The betrayal and the violence that almost killed him stayed surprisingly whole. What held there crazy about love, duty, and each other? All three of these things might have happened next. Test them in ways they didn't expect, pulling them apart while it forced to rebuild, but not before they got better. Could start. The storm had only just started to heal from a painful breakup and to the quiet power of peace in 2016 after being married for 34 years. That had ridden out the storms of fame and drug abuse and the stress of living a rock life. Sharon Osbourne found out that Ozzy had been unfaithful. The news broke their hearts, the basis of what many people thought to last as long as any union, and fans of show business all over the world who I liked how raw and wild they were, but without a doubt. Deep bond watched in shock as the couple broke up for months. There was no sound between them. Deafening. Sharon, who usually speaks out, stayed out of public debate, and Ozzy also showed up as adrift. No public sorry. There are no talks today. Darkness and stillness. The press went crazy, but neither side gave a clear answer. Just when it looked like the sad end of the story had come, and no one saw coming the unexpected turn of events, Odd's love started to stir up again, slowly, only when Sharon asked her to. And she wasn't the same woman who stood next to Ozzy through decades of chaos. Time she asked for honesty, respect, and emotional truths their way to. It wasn't easy to get along again. Years were dug up during Q's therapy meetings. To forgive and let go of hidden pain earned instead of given, yet through it all has something strong, maybe even wholly, held them together in a deep way. During a small celebration, they renewed their promises to start a new stage of life as people who have been hurt by the past, author of a hopeful but weak coming year. Still, through the quiet remaking and getting away from the spotlight, one question went on to linger on what had really happened behind the scenes for all those years. It wouldn't be Sharon Osbourne would not do it until later tell her the truth about her finally marriage to Ozzy. A truth changed by years of chaos, dedication, and pain at the same time. Drama that used to define them slowly faded away. They stepped out of the spotlight, didn't want the attention that had once seemed to go hand in hand with their interviews, for identity became rare and appearances in public even less common, and as they spoke less loudly, and a question began to form in the minds of well-known fans and people who just happened to be there. The last part of the Osbourne story, just as things were getting calm, stepped in again and hit far worse than anything they had seen before Sharon's sickness and silenced love during Ozzy's health problem. And in late 2010, the world started to see a different side of Australian Osbourne, not the wild, unbeatable rock star who bit the head off a bat or screamed until they gave up stadiums, but a man who looked worn out and slowed down, fought a silent war inside his body for decades. Ozzy had looked impossible to stop cheating death more than at least once, and laughed at limits in terms of health. But time, illness, and a life lived at full speed began at first being sneaky to catch up with him. Getting tired causes shakes and unsteadiness. In the end, it got harder to diagnose his complaints. In the beginning of 2020, Ozzy made a statement that would change everything. He had been told he had a type of Parkinson's disease called PRKN2, is not like the more usual type. Version is genetic and gets worse faster slowly, but still poses a huge problems. The illness made it hard for him to tremors were caused by nerves and muscles and stiffness, and made it hard to coordinate simple jobs that used to be hard became tiring. He had a famous walk that used to be a swagger, but Parkinson's makes them move around unsteadily. Wasn't his only fight. In 2019 he slipped and fell badly at home, making old injuries from a 2003 ATV worse accident. The fall knocked metal rods loose and put screws in his back and neck, needing major surgery and months of recovery. Many painful weeks of recovery after surgery itself was hard work, and difficulties only made things worse for him. Several surgeries on his neck, back, and shoulder. He said at one point that 15 screws were put into his back, and that the nerve pain spread sleep kept going through his body. He had trouble using his singing skills. You can talk clearly and even sit down easily. For a long time was weakened. In addition to the surgeries, Ozzy had an important staph infection in his hand that needed emergency medical care. They were afraid it would spread, which it could have caused. Even worse, what happened to return from that, it spread slowly, and added another layer to the list of all of this was hard on his health. Not just his body, but also his mind. For a man who used to love making connections with friends, being alone became both as a must and a nuisance. Tours were studio lessons that were supposed to be canceled were held anyway. Holt and Ozzy's public outings cut down on fans, who were used to seeing he was animated and cocky on stage, were afraid to ask how much longer he could fight on. He rarely gave up talks during this time, and when it was clear that he was vulnerable, been the worst in terms of length and pain. "That was the worst year of my life," he said. All of this happened in 2020. Sharon, who stood by him, never changed. Not as a TV star or manager kind of person, but as a provider, a trusted friend and support. Sharon turned to over the handling of his health care schedule, meetings that worked with experts from around the world, and made their house is a healing place for Ozzy. Praised her for keeping him alive. "She's the mentally and physically best," he claimed with confidence one time. "That's right, I still love my wife." The Osbournes, once a scene on reality TV and red carpet, slowly went out of the spotlight. Fame used to be sought after and grown. No, they no longer had the same attraction. All the noise from cameras flashing for the quiet of private nights that choose peace over chaos. Health in the news, but in the end, something changed in Sharon. She could feel the weight of the silence getting heavier. Long H held the truth inside him tighter. Had to talk. It was time to do so. She finally breaks up with Sharon Osbourne. In a raw, soul-bearing sit-down, there was silence. And News, Sharon Osbourne is now 72 years old, spoke words that had been on her mind for over 50 years. "It's time to tell the truth," she said in a clear voice, but filled with years of pain from restraint and to stay alive. It wasn't a statement for news. It was the quiet earthquake letting go of a woman finally lying down the shield for once. She wasn't talking as Ozzy's wife, his boss, or the unwavering mother of a famous person empire. She was just Sharon tired. Being honest and free, she thought about the 50 years she was tied to Ozzy Osbourne. A love story forged in fire damage and repeated breaks. I didn't know who he was when I met him. She didn't have any doubt, she admitted her with a tight smile. Her eyes sparkled with I didn't cry, but I thought that if I loved him so much I could pass away. What came next wasn't a bitter get down, but something scarier. Sharon told everyone the truth about that there were times the world never saw outside of public view and behind closed doors and stages. She talked about nights spent Ozzy was left alone while her drug use got worse. She talked about the scrapes that were hidden behind the makeup and the sorry that it felt like deja vu. She also talked about the day he tried to choke her and how she chose to stay. In some way there were times I felt like I was